What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back with another video. Players not to draft, the May edition. Actually, I believe this will be going up on May 1st. So we're obviously going to make a ton of updates to this. But as of the beginning of the draft season, these are the players I'd be avoiding the most. Before we start, a reminder, the Dynasty and the redraft rankings are fully updated on the site, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. Along with a bunch of other free data you guys can look at. We upgraded the site from last year, so there's a bunch of data if you're interested in that sort of stuff. So you can check that out over there. So this video goes up May 1st, like I said, which means ADPs are a little bit tricky to find that are accurate. Like you can find them, but they're not going to be that good. I just use the composite of Fantasy Football Calculator just a little bit, and then mostly expert consensus rankings on Fantasy Pros, only using experts who adjusted their rankings after the draft. So it's not perfect, but it's basically the best I can do right now. And I think the ADPs are pretty accurate to what we're going to see, at least at some point in the summer. So we'll start things off with Nick Chubb going in roughly the early second round right now. And I have seen him go in the late first round in some mock drafts, going ahead of Josh Jacobs, Kenyon Drake, Austin Eckler, and Miles Sanders, all of whom I have ranked ahead of Chubb. Now, they did draft an offensive lineman. You guys heard me talk about that in the video on Wednesday, I believe. Took him in the first round. It was a really good pick. It's definitely going to help their pretty bad offensive line from last year, so that's going to improve. But we need to consider his upside if there's a full season with Kareem Hunt. Because in weeks 1 through 9, Chubb played an average of 74 snaps per game. 74% of snaps. 74 snaps would be crazy. 74% of snaps he was playing without Hunt on the field, averaging a little over 19 carries per game and 4 targets per game, while scoring 6 touchdowns. So that's halfway through the year. Then we see Hunt come back from suspension, and Chubb sees 10% fewer snaps, 1 fewer carry per game, and 2 fewer targets per game, and only scores 2 touchdowns in those final 8 weeks. Now, that might not seem like a big difference, but only puts him on pace for 34 targets over a full season, and that's just not that good for a second-round running back. And the touchdown drop is also a bit concerning. Obviously, an 8-game sample is not large enough to draw conclusions from, but the numbers show what we would expect to see. Like, I wouldn't draw a conclusion if the numbers were strange, be like, oh, that doesn't make any sense. But it makes complete sense. You know, Chubb is an elite running back while Hunt is active, but he's going to see fewer opportunities, and especially so in the receiving game. And we know Hunt is pretty good at scoring touchdowns, and he's going to be on the field in the red zone. So the drops all make sense, and that's why I view him as more the running back 12 or 13, so still low-end running back 1, but he's being taken as running back 7 or 8. And so when you have a 5 running back gap, especially in the early rounds, that just means I'm not going to have any of him unless his ADP were to drop. Next player we'll go over is Tyler Boyd, and he is currently roughly the wide receiver 30, going in like the middle of the 6th round, and he finished as a wide receiver 1 just 3 times last season, finishing as the wide receiver 30 or worse in 11 of 16 weeks. Yet, he ranked 7th in targets. Think about that. What I just said, he was 7th in targets over the entire season, but just 25th in fantasy points and 36th in fantasy points per game. Now they get AJ Green back. They draft Higgins with the first pick in the 2nd round, shows that they definitely wanted him. And yet people have Boyd ranked right at where he was to end last season, but that doesn't make any sense. You know, I can promise you, if I get anything right this season, Tyler Boyd is not going to rank 7th in targets. So to draft him where he's going would assume that that's going to maintain the same as last year. But now you're adding in 2 pretty big targets into the offense. There's just no way. So I don't understand his ADP right now. I'm not even sure he's going to be on the field even close to as much as he was last season. I know that he plays the slot, and Green and Higgins are both on the outside, but I really don't see a scenario where he comes even close to the production he did last season. And even if he were to match last season, remember what I said. In 11 of 16 weeks, he was the wide receiver 30 or worse. So he wasn't even that good last season. Why would you rank him roughly where he was? So that doesn't make any sense to me. Third player we'll go over is Mark Andrews. He's going as the tight end 4 in like the middle of the 4th round. And he obviously had a great season last year. We were really excited about his potential going into the season. But this ADP is a little bit insane, especially when you consider how deep tight end is this season. I mean, this year is the deepest we've seen in the past, I don't know an exact number, probably like 5 to 7 years. This is probably the deepest tight end has been. There are a lot of really good options at the later portion of the draft, and that affects the value of the early round tight ends. So there's really just no reason to spend a 4th rounder on Andrews right now. You look at week 1 last year, 8 receptions, 108 yards and a touchdown. Week 2, 8 receptions, 112 yards and a touchdown. Goes off against the Dolphins and the Cardinals, which we now know were the 2 dream matchups and the perfect time to play those teams because the Dolphins actually got a lot better at the end of the season. After those 2 games, he did finish as a tight end 1 in 7 of his remaining 13 weeks, which is solid, but he was held under 5 receptions, so 4 or less, in 9 of the remaining 13 weeks and averaged just 49 receiving yards per game. So he really was only getting there on touchdowns, and a 15.6% touchdown rate is entirely unsustainable. I mean, if you look at the top 10 tight ends in terms of all-time touchdowns, the best tight end scorers of all time, only Gronk comes close to that, and he's still below it. You know, most of the guys in that top 10 are between 8% and 13%. So again, best touchdown scorers of all time aren't even doing what Mark Andrews did last season. So unless you think that he is the greatest tight end of all time, expect his touchdown rate to drop. And if that happens, he's just not going to be worth a 4th round pick. So I would look to avoid him and just take one of the many late round tight ends. Another player from the same team, and this is a theme you're going to see across every season that you see content from me, is efficiency. When you see teams have a highly efficient season, especially when some of them were values in the last season, like you remember Mark Andrews, a really nice late round pick, everyone wants to jump on that and say, well, that's going to happen again, so let's boost his ADP. Well, you want to try and find those efficient seasons when they're cheap in their ADP, not pay for it afterwards in the next year. Because with Mark Andrews, and now I'm going to talk about Mark Ingram, you're paying for that efficiency. You're saying, okay, I think that's going to happen again. Give me that this year and I'll pay for it. That's not how you should be doing things. You should be trying to identify those seasons before they happen, jump off them, and try and find the new one this year. So my issue with Ingram is his ADP and the touchdowns. I think he can still be valuable, and I am expecting his ADP to drop a little bit. He's going running back 23 in like the early 5th round. Maybe he squeaks into the 6th round, and at that point, I might be like, okay, we can maybe do this. Because I don't think Dobbins is going to start taking over any sort of starting role until like 75% way through the season at the earliest. Like I think for at least halfway through the year, Mark Ingram is going to be the guy. And not necessarily the guy as in he's getting all of the carries, but similar to last season. He's clearly the early down back. He's clearly featured in the red zone, although not getting all of the carries. But, you know, the number one. I think for at least halfway through the year, he'll be that. But I can't say the same in the second half of the season. And so that's not really someone that I want to take in the early 5th round. You know, we've got a soon-to-be 31-year-old running back coming off of one of the most efficient seasons ever from a touchdown perspective on a team that just drafted his replacement 55th overall. And again, I think Ingram will be the guy for at least half of the season, but after that, Dobbins is going to start taking over more work and the touchdowns. Like, I just have an issue with him having a 6.5% touchdown rate on his receptions and on his carries. If we do the same exercise, we look at the best touchdown scores of all time over the last 30 years. You've got your Emmitt Smiths, LaDainian Tomlinson, Marshall Faulk, Walter Payton. These guys have a career touchdown rate of between 3 and 4%. And so even for reference, you look at Mark Ingram, including last year's 6.5%, he's still at a career 4%. So expecting Mark Ingram to maintain 6.5% when even he and the best touchdown scores of all time are at 3 to 4%, that's ridiculous, right? So then you think, okay, well, maybe the touchdown rate goes down, but can the volume go up? I mean, not really, right? Because Dobbins is replacing Gus Edwards, and Gus only commanded 7 targets all season. So I feel pretty good saying Dobbins is going to pass that number. And then you look at the 202 carries, that doesn't have much room to go up either, because he stayed healthy right up until the final game that the starters played last year, and he had the perfect game script in nearly every game, yet he still only went over 15 carries twice all year, and one of those came in an overtime game where he only had 19 carries. So last year was just the perfect outcome for Ingram, and so he'll need to be incredibly lucky for a second consecutive season just to pay off his ADP. And I don't want to count on luck when drafting players. Final guy we'll go over is Aaron Rodgers, going as the quarterback 9, 10, 11 in that 8th or 9th round range. And I know I've taken Rodgers in at least one mock draft Monday, maybe 2 of them. But that's because I was under the assumption that they would address the wide receiver position in the draft, which they didn't. Instead they drafted Rodgers' replacement. They added a running back to an already crowded backfield. So in all likelihood, he'll enter the season with just Adams and Lazard as his top 2 wide receivers. And they're probably going to be one of the more run-heavy teams in the league. Now, I know most of you watch the draft, listen to these videos. You're not going to fight me on this one. We all know Rodgers is a little bit overvalued now, given that they didn't take anyone in the draft. But there are a few of you who will not believe me. And so the main argument I can see coming is look at the last 2 seasons. Even throwing just 25, 26 touchdowns over the last 2 years, he's been the quarterback 6 in 2018 and the quarterback 9 in 2019. And even though he's turning 37, that's not too old for Rodgers. I don't think it's too old. So you say, okay, well, 25 and 26 touchdowns is definitely in his range of outcomes, which I agree with. And he was the quarterback 6 and the quarterback 9. So isn't this a discount? Because, he was playing with pretty bad wide receivers last year too, aside from Adams. And Adams was even hurt for part of the year. I agree with all this. The problem is he was a lot worse last year than the quarterback 9 finish makes you think. In weeks 4, 7, 8, and 13, he finishes a quarterback 2, 1, 3, and 1, respectively. In every other game, he averaged less than 13 fantasy points per game, finishing as the quarterback 21 on average. So yeah, he was the quarterback 9, but it's because of 4 big games. And the rest of the time, he was giving you less than 13 fantasy points per week. And that wasn't because of a few 1s and 2s. He was getting you 13 points every week. So when you consider that and you add in the draft and you add in comments that they've made that say they're going to lean more towards the run, it just makes it a really unappealing pick. And especially because his name is Aaron Rodgers, people are going to gravitate towards him in your hometown leagues. And it's just going to keep the value where it's been. So I don't see myself drafting him at all. And I don't think you should either. So those were the 5 players I would not be drafting as of May 1st when this video goes out. Obviously, a ton's going to change over the summer. So I'm definitely going to make updates to this video. And if you always want to see the players to target and avoid, then you can check that out at our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. That's the end of this one. Hope you all did enjoy. If you did, how about hitting that like button? And how about subscribing to the channel if you're new? Thanks for watching.